She's here to wipe grease, not touch real engineering, Richard Holloway said, his voice echoing across the polished concrete of the garage, sharp enough to cut through the low hum of machinery and the quiet murmur of investors gathered around the prototype. And just like that, the room went still, as if even the engine itself had paused to listen. Ava Carter didn't look up at first, her hands steady on the wrench. Fingers darkened with oil, the metallic scent thick in the air, fluorescent. Lights buzzing overhead, reflecting off the chrome surfaces like cold judgment. She had heard words like that before, not once, not twice, but enough times to know exactly what silence followed them. The kind that waited to see if she would shrink, step back, disappear, but she didn't. Instead, she tightened the bolt one last time, slow, precise, then set the wrench down with a soft metallic click that seemed louder than it should have been. And only then did she straighten, her posture calm, controlled, her eyes meeting the engine before they met him. As if the machine mattered more than the man who owned it, Richard stood a few feet away, dressed in a tailored suit that didn't belong in a place like this, surrounded by men in pressed shirts and polished shoes, their attention divided between him and the sleek black car sitting under the overhead lights, a machine worth over $500,000. A prototype he had been bragging about all morning, a symbol of innovation, of control, of everything he believed he owned. Make sure someone qualified handles it, he added, not even looking at her this time, as if she were already invisible, a background detail in his version of the story. A few quiet laughs rippled through the group, subtle, restrained, but enough, always enough. Ava inhaled slowly, the air cool against her lungs, steadying, grounding, the way she had learned to do years ago when words tried to define her before she could speak. Her gaze shifted back to the engine, listening, not to people, but to the faint ticking beneath the hood, a rhythm just slightly off, almost unnoticeable unless you knew what to hear, unless you had built your life around understanding. Machines that spoke in silence. Her voice, when it came, was calm, almost too calm for the tension hanging in the room. If you start it now, it won't make it past 10 minutes. The words didn't rise, didn't challenge. They simply existed, clear and certain, and for a second, no one reacted. Then someone chuckled, another shook his head. Richard finally turned, a slow smile forming, amused, dismissive. "And you figured that out from wiping it down?" he asked, the sarcasm light but deliberate, measured for an audience. Ava didn't respond to him directly. Her eyes stayed on the engine, focused, steady. "It's not the surface," she said quietly. "It's the internal timing sequence. It's off by less than half a degree, but it compounds under load." A pause followed, longer this time, heavier, the kind that didn't come from politeness but from something else, something beginning to shift. One of the investors frowned slightly, glancing at the car, then at the tablet in his hand, as if something Ava said had brushed against a detail he couldn't ignore. Richard let out a short breath, almost a laugh. "We've had top engineers on this," he replied, confident, controlled. "I think we're fine." But his voice didn't land the same way it had before, not quite as sharp, not quite as certain, because somewhere in the background, beneath the polished words and tailored confidence, the machine ticked again, soft, persistent, like a quiet warning no one else had noticed yet. The investor did not laugh this time. His thumb hovered over the tablet screen as he zoomed in, scrolling back and forth, the glow from the display reflecting faintly on his glasses. "Half a degree," he murmured under his breath, not to Richard, not to anyone, just to the numbers in front of him. Ava remained where she stood, her hands relaxed at her sides, shoulders steady, as if she had already stepped out of the room in her mind, leaving only the truth behind. Richard noticed the shift, subtle but real, the way attention began to drift away from him, from his words, towards something he did not control. His jaw tightened just slightly. "We have tested this engine across multiple simulations," he said, his tone firmer now, projecting confidence back into the space. "It has passed every performance metric." The words sounded polished, rehearsed, the kind that belonged in boardrooms, not garages. But the investor did not respond immediately. Instead, he turned the tablet slightly, angling it toward another man beside him, both of them studying the same line of data, the same small detail buried beneath layers of technical language. Ava's gaze flickered toward the screen for a brief moment. Not Curious, not anxious, just confirming. Like someone recognizing a signature they had written long ago. The engine ticked again. A faint metallic pulse, steady but not right, like a heartbeat out of sync. There is a tolerance deviation here, the investor said finally, his voice quieter now, more careful. It is small, but under stress conditions. He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. The implication hung in the air, incomplete but heavy. Richard stepped closer, his polished shoes echoing softly against the floor. That is within acceptable range, he replied quickly, almost too quickly. Our team accounted for that. But even as he spoke, his eyes flicked to the tablet, then to the engine, then, almost unwillingly, toward Ava. She did not move, did not react. Her calm remained intact, not defiant, not submissive, just present, like a fixed point in a room that had begun to tilt. One of the technicians near the car hesitated, glancing between Richard and the engine, his hand hovering near the ignition controls, unsure whether to proceed. The air grew tighter, filled with the quiet friction of doubt. Richard exhaled slowly, forcing a small smile back onto his face. Go ahead, he said, nodding toward the technician. Let us show them what it can do. The technician paused for a fraction of a second longer, then reached forward, his fingers brushing against the start button. Ava's voice came again, softer this time, but sharper, like a line drawn across the moment. Once it starts, you cannot undo the damage. The words did not rise, did not plead. They simply existed, undeniable. The technician froze, his hand still hovering. The investors shifted subtly. The confidence in the room no longer solid, but fractured. Richard's smile thinned, tension threading through it now. You are out of line, he said, his voice lower, controlled, but edged with something colder, something that did not like being questioned. Ava met his gaze fully this time, her eyes steady, unshaken. No, she said quietly. I am exactly in line. Silence followed, deeper than before, not empty, but filled with something building, something waiting, and somewhere beneath the hood. The engine ticked again, patient, precise, as if it already knew how this would end. The technician slowly pulled his hand back from the ignition as if the button itself had turned hot. No one told him to stop, but no one told him to continue either, and that hesitation spread through the room like a silent signal. Richard noticed it immediately, the loss of momentum, the way control was slipping not in a dramatic way, but in something quieter, more dangerous, uncertainty. He straightened his posture, adjusting the cuff of his sleeve with deliberate precision, a small gesture, meant to reassert authority. We are not delaying this demonstration over speculation, he said, his voice firm, measured, but the words no longer carried the same weight they had just minutes ago. One of the investors stepped closer to the car, his eyes scanning the engine bay, not as a spectator anymore, but as someone looking for proof. Run me through it, he said, not to Richard, but to the technician, who hesitated again before answering. It is a high-performance inline system, custom-tuned, built for rapid acceleration under load. His explanation sounded practiced, but thinner now, like it had lost something essential. The investor nodded slightly, then glanced at Ava. And you are saying the timing sequence fails under stress? He asked, direct, curious, not dismissive. Ava did not step forward, did not try to claim space she had not been given. Her voice remained steady. It does not fail immediately, she said. It degrades. The system compensates at first, but the imbalance grows. 10 minutes is the threshold before it becomes irreversible. The word irreversible lingered, heavier than the rest. The investor looked back at the tablet, then at Richard. Is that accounted for in your testing data? He asked. Richard felt the shift again, sharper this time, the conversation moving around him instead of through him. Our engineers validated every parameter, he replied. But now he reached for the tablet himself, scanning quickly, searching for the reassurance he expected to find instantly. But it did not come as quickly as it should have. His eyes paused on the same section the investor had flagged, the same subtle deviation, small enough to ignore, unless someone had pointed directly at it. Ava watched him without expression, not waiting for him to agree, not needing him to. The truth was already there, written in numbers, in metal, in the quiet ticking beneath the hood. One of the other investors leaned in, lowering his voice. Where did this design originate? The question seemed simple, but it shifted everything. Richard looked up, caught slightly off guard. It was acquired through a private development contract, he said, carefully, choosing words that sounded complete without being specific. Our team refined it for production. The investor nodded slowly, then turned the tablet toward the others, zooming in further, highlighting a section of the digital blueprint. Because this signature here, he said, tapping lightly on the screen. This is not your firm's mark. The room tightened again. But this time it was different, not tension from conflict, but from realization beginning to surface. Richard's expression held for a moment, controlled, composed, but something underneath it flickered, something uncertain. His gaze shifted from the tablet to the engine, then finally, reluctantly, back to Ava. She did not move, did not react, her presence unchanged, steady as the machine. She understood better than anyone in the room. And for the first time since he walked into the garage, Richard Holloway did not look like the man in control. He looked like someone trying to understand how the ground beneath him had shifted without warning. The investor's finger remained on the tablet screen, hovering over the highlighted signature as if pressing it any harder might force the truth to reveal itself faster. The glow from the display casting a faint reflection across his face. This identifier, he said slowly. It is registered under a different origin. The words did not rise, but they landed with precision, one by one, and the quiet in the garage deepened. Richard did not respond immediately. His gaze locked on the screen now, scanning, recalculating, as if searching for a version of reality that still belonged to him. But the longer he looked, the less certain that version became. One of the other investors leaned in closer, adjusting his glasses. Cross-reference it, he said, and within seconds, another tablet was pulled up, another set of data layered over the first, lines of code, timestamps, ownership records, all aligning toward a single point that no longer pointed to Richard Holloway, but to something older, something original, something he had not created. Ava stood a few feet away, her weight balanced evenly, her presence quiet but impossible to ignore now. The fluorescent lights above hummed softly, reflecting off the polished curves of the engine, and for the first time, it did not look like a symbol of wealth or control. It looked like evidence, the kind that did not speak loudly but refused to be dismissed. Where did you source this design? The first investor asked again, his tone no longer casual, no longer curious, but deliberate. Richard lifted his head, his expression still composed, but thinner now, stretched over something less stable. As I said, it was acquired, he replied, but the confidence behind the words had shifted, no longer solid, no longer absolute. The investor nodded slowly, then turned his tablet outward, angling it so the others could see clearly. Because according to this registry, he continued, the original patent holder is listed under a private engineering submission. 5 years ago. He paused, letting the details settle, and the name attached to it. His voice trailed just slightly, not from uncertainty, but from the weight of what he was about to say. Richard's eyes flicked toward Ava again, this time not dismissive, not indifferent, but searching. The space between them felt different now, no longer defined by status, but by something else entirely, something he had not accounted for. Ava met his gaze without flinching, her expression unchanged, steady, grounded, as if she had already lived this moment long before it arrived. The investor glanced from the tablet to Ava, then back again, connecting the final line that no one else had been willing to draw until now. Ava Carter, he said, clearly, the name landing in the center of the room like a quiet impact. And for a brief second, everything seemed to pause. The hum of the lights, the shifting of feet, even the subtle ticking of the engine beneath the hood. Richard's breath slowed, his posture held, but something behind his eyes shifted, recognition, not of her position in the garage, but of something far more significant, something he had overlooked entirely. The silence that followed was no longer empty. It was full, dense with realization, and Ava did not move, did not step forward, did not claim anything. She simply stood there, as she had from the beginning, unchanged, while everything around her finally began to catch up to the truth she had already known. No one spoke for a moment after her name settled into the air, not because they did not understand it, but because they were still adjusting to what it meant. Richard Holloway stood still, his expression carefully held together, but the shift in him was undeniable now. Subtle cracks forming beneath the surface of control he had maintained since he walked in. His eyes moved from Ava to the engine, then back again, as if trying to reconcile two completely different versions of the same reality. The one he believed in and the one now unfolding in front of him. That is not possible, he said finally, his voice lower, quieter than before, not defensive, not yet, but uncertain, and that uncertainty did more than any argument could have. It changed the room. One of the investors did not look at him when he responded, his attention still fixed on the data. The patent is registered, verified, and time-stamped, he said, his tone calm but absolute. The design originated under her name. Another investor nodded, slowly, crossing his arms, his posture shifting from passive observer to active evaluator, which means the foundation of this prototype is not proprietary to your firm, he added, and this time, there was no softness in the statement. It was a conclusion, not a suggestion. The air tightened again, but now it carried a different kind of pressure, not tension from conflict, but from consequence. Richard exhaled slowly, his hand brushing against the edge of the car, as if grounding himself, the polished surface reflecting a version of him that no longer matched the moment. We acquired the rights through a third party, he said, carefully, choosing each word as if precision alone could restore control. All legal channels were followed. Ava listened without interruption, her posture unchanged, her presence steady. She did not argue, did not step forward, because she did not need to. The truth had already moved beyond conversation. It had entered the room as fact. One of the investors glanced at her again, this time not with curiosity, but with recognition. Then you would know exactly who created it, he said, directing the statement toward Richard, but allowing it to linger between them all. Richard did not answer immediately, his silence stretching just long enough to be noticed, long enough to confirm what he had not yet said. Ava finally spoke, her voice calm, even, without any trace of triumph or accusation. You never looked, she said, and the simplicity of it cut deeper than anything else, not because it was harsh, but because it was true. Richard's gaze met hers fully now, and for the first time, there was no dismissal in it, no distance, only realization, slow and heavy, settling in, the kind that did not arrive all at once, but piece by piece. The engine ticked again beneath the hood, soft, consistent, unchanged by everything happening around it, as if reminding them all that it had always been what it was, regardless of who claimed it. One of the investors stepped back slightly, folding his tablet, his decision already forming. We will need to reassess this demonstration, he said, his tone professional, controlled, but final. And just like that, the momentum Richard had built began to dissolve, not dramatically, not loudly, but steadily, like something losing pressure. The room shifted again, conversations lowering, attention redirecting, but Ava did not move. She remained exactly where she had been from the start, grounded, composed, untouched by the rise and fall of everything around her, because for her, nothing had changed. She had known the truth before anyone else had even thought to question it, and now that truth stood in the open. Undeniable, not because she forced it there, but because it had always been there, waiting for someone to finally see it. The room did not erupt. It did not collapse into chaos. Instead it thinned, like air being slowly pulled out, leaving behind something quieter, heavier, more difficult to ignore. The investors stepped back one by one, not in retreat, but in recalibration. Their conversations dropped to low murmurs, measured, deliberate, the kind that signaled decisions being made without needing to be announced. Richard Holloway remained where he stood, his hand still resting lightly against the car, but now it looked less like ownership and more like he was steadying himself against something shifting beneath him. His reflection in the polished surface wavered slightly as he moved, not because the car changed, but because his certainty had. Ava Carter turned her attention back to the engine, not to dismiss what had happened, but because for her, the machine still mattered. It always had. She stepped closer, lifting the hood fully, the hinges releasing with a soft metallic sound, and the internal components caught the overhead light. Intricate, precise, built with intention. She studied it quietly, her eyes tracing the alignment, the sequence, the flaw she had already named. Her fingers hovered just above the surface, not touching, just reading, the way someone reads something they know by heart. Behind her, one of the technicians approached slowly, hesitant. "Is it fixable?" he asked, his voice low, almost careful. Ava did not look at him immediately, her gaze still on the engine. "Yes," she said, "but not like this." The words were simple, but they carried a weight that settled into the space between them. The technician nodded once, absorbing it, as if understanding that what he was asking was no longer just technical. It was something else, something tied to ownership, to truth, to who had the right to decide what came next. Richard finally stepped forward, the distance between him and Ava closing, but not in the way it had before, not with authority, but with something quieter, something uncertain. He stopped just short of her. His voice, when it came, was lower, stripped of the projection he had relied on earlier. "Why did you not say anything before?" he asked, not accusing, not defensive, but searching. Ava straightened slightly, closing the hood with a controlled motion, the latch clicking into place with a soft finality. She turned to face him fully, her expression unchanged, steady, grounded. "I did," she said, and there was no emphasis in her tone, no need for it. The truth of it stood on its own. Richard held her gaze, the words settling into him slowly, not as an argument to respond to, but as something to understand. The silence between them stretched, not uncomfortable, but reflective, the kind that forces thought instead of reaction. In the background, the garage lights continued their steady hum, the faint scent of oil and metal lingering in the air, unchanged by everything that had just shifted. One of the investors approached again, this time with less distance, his posture more open. "Miss Carter," he said, addressing her directly now, not as an afterthought, but as the center of the conversation. "If the correction is made, what would the performance look like?" Ava glanced briefly at the engine, then back at him. "Stable," she said. "Efficient. Exactly what it was designed to be." The investor nodded slowly, as if confirming something beyond just the mechanics, something about clarity, about truth, about seeing something correctly for the first time. Richard remained still beside her, no longer speaking, no longer directing, just present. And for the first time since he entered the garage, the space did not revolve around him. It revolved around the quiet certainty of someone he had not taken the time to see. And that realization settled in deeper than any words could have, not loud, not immediate, but lasting, like something that would not leave once it had been understood. The shift did not come with noise. It came with alignment, quiet and undeniable, like something long out of place finally settling where it belonged. The investors no longer stood in a loose circle around Richard. They had repositioned, subtly but clearly, their attention angled toward Ava, their posture no longer casual, but engaged, intentional. One of them stepped closer again, holding the tablet out, not to challenge, but to confirm. "Walk me through the correction," he said, his tone direct, respectful, as if the question itself had weight now. Ava moved without hesitation, stepping beside the car once more, her hand resting lightly on the edge of the hood, not claiming it, just connecting to it. "The issue starts here," she said, gesturing toward the internal timing system beneath the surface, her voice steady, clear, each word placed with precision. "The sequence is calibrated for ideal conditions, but it does not adjust fast enough under real load. That delay compounds." The investor nodded, following, not interrupting. Another moved closer, listening, the group tightening, not around power, but around understanding. Ava continued, "You correct the timing response by adjusting the sequence offset, less than half a degree, but it has to be exact, or the imbalance returns." She paused briefly, her eyes flicking to the engine as if seeing it already corrected, already complete. Once it is aligned, the system stabilizes, performance holds, no degradation. Silence followed again, but this time it was different. Not tension, not doubt, but absorption, the kind that comes when something finally makes sense. One of the investors exhaled slowly, almost a quiet acknowledgement. "And you designed that response?" he asked. Ava met his gaze, not with pride, not with hesitation, just with truth. "Yes," she said, the words simple, grounded, enough. Richard stood just behind her now, close enough to hear every detail, every explanation, but not part of it, not leading it. His presence had shifted completely, no longer the center, no longer the voice that directed the room. He watched, not as an owner, but as someone learning something he should have known, something he had overlooked. His eyes moved from Ava's hands to the engine, then to the investors, seeing the change reflected back at him from every angle. One of the investors turned slightly, addressing him now, but differently. "If this correction is implemented," he said, "the performance matches the original design intent." It was not a question, it was a statement, one that no longer depended on Richard's answer. Richard inhaled slowly, the weight of it settling in. "It appears so," he replied, his voice quieter, stripped of the certainty it once carried. Ava stepped back slightly, giving space, not out of deference, but because she had said what needed to be said. She did not linger in the attention, did not hold on to it. The engine sat between them all, unchanged in form, but completely different in meaning now. No longer a symbol of ownership, but of origin, of authorship, of truth made visible. The fluorescent lights above cast steady reflections across the metal, sharp lines of light that did not bend or blur, just like the reality now standing in the room. One of the investors closed his tablet slowly, a small gesture, but final. "We would like to continue this discussion," he said, looking directly at Ava, not Richard, "with the person who actually understands the system." The words landed without force, but they shifted everything once again, and this time, there was no resistance left to meet them. Richard remained still, his gaze fixed on Ava, not with dismissal, not with confusion, but with something else entirely, recognition, not just of what she had done, but of what he had failed to see, and that realization stayed quiet, heavy, and impossible to ignore, as the room continued to move forward without him at its center. The conversation did not disperse, it narrowed, like a lens focusing on a single point, and that point was no longer the car, no longer the deal, but Ava Carter. One of the investors stepped fully into her space now, not intruding, but meeting her at eye level. "We would like to understand your original intent behind the design," he said, his voice steady, respectful, the kind of tone reserved for someone whose expertise had already been proven. Ava held his gaze for a brief moment, then glanced back at the car, the polished surface reflecting fragments of everyone standing around it. "It was never meant to be pushed beyond stability," she said, her voice calm, measured. "The goal was consistency under pressure, not just peak performance." The investor nodded slowly, absorbing the distinction. Another stepped closer, folding his arms. "And that is where the current configuration fails," he added, more to the group than to her. Ava gave a slight nod, not correcting, not elaborating further than necessary, because the point had already landed. Richard remained just behind them, close enough to hear every word, but no longer part of the exchange, his presence quieter now, almost secondary, as if the room had redefined who held the authority to speak. He watched Ava carefully, not with the detached observation he had before, but with attention, the kind that comes too late but still arrives. "Why did you leave it unfinished?" another investor asked, his tone curious, not accusatory. Ava paused, just for a second, her eyes lowering slightly, not in avoidance, but in thought. "I did not leave it unfinished," she said, lifting her gaze again. "I left it before it could be taken further." The words were simple, but they carried something deeper, something not technical, something personal. The investor did not press, he did not need to. The answer was complete in a way that did not require detail. The garage felt different now, quieter, not because people had left, but because the noise that had filled it before had been replaced with something more focused, more intentional. One of the investors turned slightly, glancing at Richard. "We will need to revisit the terms of this agreement," he said, his tone professional, but no longer aligned with him. Richard nodded once, slowly, the motion controlled, but the meaning behind it heavier than the gesture itself. He stepped forward finally, closing the distance between himself and Ava, but stopping just short, respecting a boundary he had not acknowledged before. "You should have been credited," he said, his voice low, not defensive, not performative, just direct. Ava looked at him, her expression unchanged, steady as it had been from the beginning. It would not have changed the design, she replied, and there was no bitterness in her tone, no accusation, just truth. The kind that did not seek validation. Richard held her gaze for a moment longer, then nodded slightly. As if accepting something he could not undo, the investors began to shift again, but this time with purpose. Conversations forming around next steps, around revisions, around possibilities that no longer included assumptions. Ava stepped back from the center of the group, not because she was dismissed, but because she had already said everything that mattered. Her role in the moment complete, the engine sat between them all, unchanged in form, but transformed in meaning, no longer a symbol of ownership or status, but of origin, of clarity, of something that could not be taken once it had been seen. And as the room continued to move forward, it did so with a different center, one built not on assumption, but on truth, quiet, steady, and finally acknowledged. The garage did not return to what it had been. It could not. Something fundamental had shifted, not in the walls or the machines, but in the space between people, the way attention moved, the way silence carried meaning. Ava Carter stood near the edge of the work area now, no longer at the center of the conversation, but not pushed aside either, simply present, grounded, as she had been from the beginning. One of the technicians approached her quietly, holding a clean cloth in his hands, not offering it, just holding it, unsure if he should speak. If you were to adjust it, he said carefully, would you do it here or rebuild the system entirely? Ava glanced toward the engine, the same engine that had drawn every eye in the room just minutes before, now sitting still under the fluorescent lights, unchanged, waiting. Here, she said. It was always meant to be corrected, not replaced. The technician nodded, absorbing not just the instruction, but the intention behind it. Across the room, the investors had gathered into a smaller group, their voices low but focused, no longer discussing possibilities in abstract terms, but making decisions rooted in clarity. One of them turned briefly, looking toward Ava again, not with curiosity, but with acknowledgement, the kind that did not need to be spoken to be understood. Richard Holloway remained near the car, his posture still, his presence quieter than it had ever been. He ran his hand lightly along the edge of the hood, not with ownership, but with awareness, as if touching something he was only now beginning to understand. His gaze lifted, finding Ava again, not across a divide, but across a space that no longer held the same imbalance. He stepped toward her, not with urgency, not with authority, just with intention, stopping at a respectful distance. If you decide to move forward with this, he said, his voice steady, measured, it should be on your terms. Ava looked at him, her expression unchanged, calm, clear, the same as it had been when no one else was listening. It always was, she replied, and the words did not challenge him. They simply existed as truth. Richard nodded once, slowly, accepting what he could not reshape. Behind them, the garage continued its quiet rhythm, tools being moved, footsteps soft against concrete. The hum of the lights steady and constant. The engine remained still, but no longer silent in meaning. It had spoken through everything that had unfolded, and now it no longer needed to. Ava turned back toward her workbench, picking up her tools with the same steady motion she had always used. Nothing about her movement changed,